All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Sarah Davis. I'm the chair of the Membership and Sponsorship Committee for ULI St. Louis. And this Market Insight series was an idea of our committee earlier in the year when the programming hadn't quite kicked off in the virtual world yet. And we thought, what's a great way to let people learn about what our sponsors are doing, what they're seeing. And so I think this is the 5th one we've had so far this year. And hope to continue doing this series into next year as well. So it's a little bit of a new programming thing for ULI St. Louis. Today, you guys are going to be hearing from two folks with PGAV, Andy Struckoff and Adam Jones. I'm going to introduce Andy, and he's going to speak a little bit about PGAV and the work that they're doing, and then Adam will take it away. I've actually known Andy for 10 or 12 years, maybe even more now. We used to work at Hush Blackwell together, but Andy is now over at PGAV Planners. He's a vice president there, and he provides leadership and insight on all projects. He's worked on quarter plans, neighborhood plans, policy, finance, and organizational development projects in more than 100 communities across the country. Andy has expertise in understanding community needs and their long-term vision and charting a path forward to achieve the results they want. Andy is the on-call economic development consultant for the St. Louis Innovation District, which is Cortex, several national developers, major underwriters, and communities across the country. With experience at the municipal level from the investment side and at PGAV, Andy has an ability to understand all sides of land use and economic development decisions and create a plan that is visionary, actionable, and achievable. Andy recently served on the St. Louis County Economic Recovery Team and brings that knowledge to this process. And most importantly, this area. So Andy, take it away.
Oh, thank you, Sarah. And thank you, Kelly, for organizing this morning. We appreciate the opportunity to present to you all. As Sarah mentioned, we do a lot of work in the St. Louis region and across the country. We've worked on probably close to $3 billion in real estate development over the past decade across all kinds of real estate classes and in various markets from Las Vegas to the west to Virginia to the east, down in New Orleans in the south, and up north into Chicago. So what we're going to talk about this morning, and I'm going to introduce Adam Jones here in a second, and he can tell you more about this, is earlier this year, once things started to get really weird, we explored, how can we get more information to help us understand movement in the commercial real estate economy. And so we partnered with a third-party data provider that helps us understand foot traffic by tracking cell phone data. And Adam Jones, who's a senior project manager with us, and prior to joining PGAV was the Planning and Economic Development Director for the city of Crestwood in St. Louis County, is kind of going to go through some of the things we've been watching and learning. And we have a echo there. With that, I'm going to hand it off to Adam.
Thank you, Andy. We have a brief presentation that we're going to go through with you all today. So hopefully everybody can see my screen here. So we wanted, again, as Andy said, we've partnered with this third-party data provider, and they allow us to anonymously track cell phone data so that it gives us location analytics in a way that wasn't thought possible a few years ago. So first off, I want to go through an overview of how we use that data, how it's collected anonymously, and how it's utilized by us. Then I'm going to go into national trends. What do we see through national retailers and some other commercial locations? And then I'll give us some specifics on what's happening within the state of Missouri. And then we'll dive in a little deeper and kind of show you how the sausage is made a little bit, and give you some specific case studies on locations throughout the state of Missouri. So without further ado, cell phone data is a brand new I'd say frontier in terms of location analytics. So how do we observe and track and analyze visitation to a place? Well, we do it with cell phones and tablets, because when all those applications are installed on your tablet or your cell phone, you enter into a location sharing agreement with some of them. And so your data is anonymously tracked and then sold to third and fourth parties, like us. And we will use an algorithm to track those panels, as we call them, because sometimes people will have tablets with them, sometimes people will have cell phones, but it's really unlikely anybody under the age of 18 anymore doesn't have a cell phone that has one of these applications on there. So again, it really gives us a high degree of accuracy to track the way that people move through a community, how long they stay in a certain place, and how, what those shopping patterns are with those persons. So location data is provided to us again through party applications and through GPS. So it gives us a high degree of accuracy as to where people are. Again, all four major cell phone companies and pretty much every cell phone on the planet has these applications that are installed to them. So again, this data is provided to us by Verizon, AT&T, Sprint, and T-Mobile. And when you utilize this data, you begin to recognize patterns and trends within travel, shopping habits, and visitation. So, the algorithm that we use typically stays within a 6-minute location visit. And what I mean by that is you have to stay within a certain geo-fenced area in order to be pinged as a visit for 6 minutes. Now we can alter that and we can change that to any degree of stay that we would like. So if we're simply trying to monitor trails or park access or a certain roadway with cell phones, we can change that to a 1-second drive-by and capture absolutely everything that pings that location data source or that source that we're trying to monitor. So it's pretty neat, but it can get messy pretty quickly. And the one thing that I will tell you about this data is that you can get completely lost in it, where I've spent days upon days just looking and researching and looking into this data because of the cool factor that's associated with it for those of you that haven't played with it yet. So again, where do we see this going in the future? And as a result of COVID, what are some of the market insights we can give you nationally? And that, we all know that I'm going to give you evidence today that shows you that, yes, the economy has slowed. We already knew the economy slowed, right? We knew that. We've seen data. We don't expect it to pick back up until spring 2021. That's what our data is showing us, that full consumer confidence in terms of visiting a place is going to be restored upon that point. There is absolutely nothing holding this economy back other than artificial means that are implemented through policy in the government. People are ready to get back out, and we're going to show you examples of that. And it's exciting when you think about it that way. Also, there's been a major shift to online retailing and online shopping, and I'll show you some of those trends as well. The most important thing that I'm going to go over with you today is all the figures I'm going to show you relate to visitation, and visitation does not equal revenue. There are certain types of businesses that can't phone in their revenue and cannot rely on online commerce, but simply because visitation to a store has dropped to almost zero does not necessarily mean that you should sell their stock. Whole Foods is a great example of that, where they have a great logistics chain through Amazon. So they could be sending product out the back door and being delivered directly to people's homes. And we would not necessarily track that with location data. We would have other ways of looking at that. And again, some shopping habits and the way stores are designed are going to be changed forever as a result of this. And as with every planning paper you've probably ever read, further monitoring and is going to be required in order to make sure that these projections and this forecast stays true. So we'll jump into some national trends here and what we've seen. So we know that all 50 states have been negatively impacted by COVID. There's been a decrease in the amount of foot traffic that's flowed into pretty much all commercial stores or all sectors, including businesses, in terms of the amount of people that are showing up to work every day, how people are shopping. And what we've also found is cities with less than 700 people were the ones that were unaffected, mainly because those smaller cities don't have the commercial base that larger cities would. So that's the reason that they're going to be less affected than the larger cities, which kind of makes sense when you think about it. So we're going to dive in a little quicker. I'm going to go into some examples of national brands, what's happened over the last several months in terms of visitation. And again, we're tracking this for national retailers. We'll give you several industry standards, but I want to tell you that home improvement has been one of the strongest segments, as you'll see here in a second, out of all the retail industries. As people were asked to stay home as part of stay-at-home orders, they obviously spend more time at home, see things that need to be improved, and then they flock to the home improvement stores to fix those things. And it's pretty incredible. So here's Kohl's. You can see that most of the data I'm going to show you begins on February 1st. I can go back as far as 2016 if I need to, but I think for the purposes of today, this is a good range. And I'll tell you if I switch that up at any point. But starting on February 1st and lasting until last week of November 7th, you can actually see the frequency of foot traffic change year over year in terms of Kohl's. So what I'm showing you here is February 1st, 2020 compared to February 1st, 2019, there was a slight increase in the amount of traffic that came into every Kohl's location in the United States. Again, this is a national comparison. So as COVID hit, as the number of COVID cases increased in the United States, foot traffic at this Kohl's stores actually decreased. And you can see outliers here that such as back to school and other national shopping events, such as the launch of their 50% off sale, brought people back into the store. But I guess in the long range, for the range that I'm showing you, they've lost a lot of foot traffic in their stores, probably on an average of around 60% if you were to take these figures and again apply them to how much foot traffic they've just lost. Even with the implementation of Amazon returns in their stores, it seems to have not really helped them too much during this pandemic. So we'll look at Costco. Costco is a great example when we see, people were stocking up as the amount of COVID cases increased again. People were visiting Costco. And as the pandemic hit and the stay-at-home orders came into effect, people stopped visiting the stores. Again, you can see spikes and fluctuations throughout COVID in terms of year-over-year foot traffic comparison that people are continuing to go to Costco. They do have off days, but it's still a great segment in terms of attracting foot traffic. People are still going into Costco and buying things and using their shopping carts as opposed to online revenue sources. If anybody wants to guess what happened here, it's when Lysol came back in stock. And I'm just kidding. I'm sorry, that's a bad joke. But this is actually just the biggest spike before the pandemic hit. So again, we look at Whole Foods, which was the example I gave you earlier. Again, same range, number of cases increased, people stopped visiting the stores. But again, just because visitation decreased does not necessarily mean that Whole Foods is losing a lot of money, because they could be relying a lot on e-commerce, which in fact they are. AMC Theaters, a company that cannot rely on e-commerce. We all know that people have to physically attend the theater in order to watch these movies. You can see foot traffic has dropped off to almost nothing. And again, they're still struggling badly at around 80% as of today or last week, excuse me, in terms of year-over-year foot traffic change, where they're down almost 80% nationally across all their theater chains. This spike right here, this outlier, was Valentine's Day. So we still have sweeties taking their sweeties to movies on a special day before the pandemic or right before the pandemic, where you can see that major upswing where a lot of people were like, well, we've got to go see a movie before this thing kicks off, and we're forced to stay at home. So they did. And that's what that outlier is. Lowe's Home Improvement, I promise to show you this. You can see foot traffic increases throughout all the stores nationally in Lowe's. Year-over-year foot traffic change. So they're just killing it in every home improvement sector, or every home improvement retailer is killing it through the United States. I mean, daily they're up somewhere in the 45% range year-over-year foot traffic increases with the amount of people that are coming into their stores. This was back to school, so a lot of people were out moving their kids back in. And again, this was the initial point of the stay-at-home orders for most states, where people didn't visit the store. They're like, hey, we've got to fix things up. And so they started to flock back into the home improvement stores and spending money. So the other thing I wanted to show you that correlates with the frequencies of increases and decreases in foot traffic, which is why I want to say visitation does not equal revenue, is when we look at the Fred data that just came out, I believe this week, you can see that the percentage of online shopping has just increased dramatically just over this last quarter, to the point where in the forecasted trends or projections, we weren't supposed to reach this point until 2024, and we've reached it in three periods earlier, 3 years earlier. So there has been a major increase in the amount of shopping and e-commerce that's occurred within the U.S. And so keep that in mind when we're going through this. Again, that I'll say it one more time: visitation does not equal revenue unless we've gone in and we've actually shown you that. So we also have the ability to look at large areas. We can look at state recovery in terms of how much year-over-year foot traffic changed across all categories of retail and commerce. So I'm going to rank these states that kind of neighbor us. And so Wisconsin's retail economy is off by about 19.86% in terms of visitation. Illinois is off by about 19.53% in terms of total visitation. California is off by 18.3, Colorado 17.2, Michigan 15.4, and Indiana, which is 12.8. And then that leaves Missouri right here behind Michigan and in between Indiana at 13.7. We're off about 13% of total visitation within all commercial categories, which isn't too bad. But if you keep in mind that Missouri's had one of the more laxed policies in terms of stay-at-home orders, and if you were to leave St. Louis and travel to places like Columbia, Sedalia, any place down south, you would notice that those communities remain totally unaffected by COVID. Those people are out living their lives, no masks. Whether that's a good idea or bad, it's not for me. Well, it's probably a bad idea, but it's really not for me to decide. But again, those economies remain unaffected, which is probably why Missouri has been less affected than other states. So let's look at some cities in particular in Missouri. Again, as I said, we're off by about 13.76% in terms of total visitation. Here are the industries that we track, or that are tracked. We found that these are the best industries to use as indicators. We've got apparel, electronics, fitness, groceries, home improvement, hotel, casinos, medical health, office supplies, shops and service, shopping centers, superstores, and dining. And so these industries will actually tell you every single location within the state of Missouri that's classified as one of these would be included in these industries. So we can get an aggregate sum of how off visitation is to each one of these locations. So again, apparel's down, probably one of the worst. So is shopping centers, and so is hotels and casinos, which probably already you can probably reaffirm through your real life observations that nobody's really staying in any hotels or traveling too much, except for certain locations within the state, and we'll show you those. So again, the two industries that are doing really well, people are buying more groceries, and then they're also spending more on home improvement. Those are the only two categories in the state that are really driving foot traffic to their stores through the pandemic, and then also through November. So this is kind of an industry analysis that you can do for pretty much anything. You can isolate throughout the state different industry leaders, and then compare foot traffic to each industry leader throughout the state. So if you look here, you can see Northern Tool being the smallest in terms of market share, Rural King, Harbor Freight Tools, Tractor, and then we get larger into Lowe's Home Improvement, which has the largest market share in the state. And you can see that these peaks and valleys are going to be weekend shopping, because this is a daily analysis in terms of foot traffic. So in the state of Missouri, the peak shopping period or foot traffic period was going to be in around late or mid-May, in which Lowe's received over 500,000 visitors to all of its stores within the state. And again, this is a really interesting analysis whenever you're trying to input within a smaller community or a larger region, who has the largest market share in terms of foot traffic, and who's doing the best at driving these people to shop in their stores. So Kansas City, again, you can look at large areas such as their downtown, which is something that I traced out and created a geofence and then grabbed all the cell phone pings within that area. You know, they've witnessed an 18.6% loss of foot traffic across all categories and a 78% loss in downtown foot traffic. It's dropped off to almost nothing. It's pretty incredible. And again, for those of us that live in St. Louis, I think it's most of us, we could probably, again, correlate that with our observations of downtown St. Louis, which is completely dead. You know, I go to work almost every day. I'm not there now, but you know, there's nobody on the streets or the sidewalks. You walk by the arch, there's still some minor tourism, but not a whole lot. And again, they've lost about 45.2% of tourism, because one of the things you can do with cell phone data is you can isolate where these people live anonymously within a 6-block area. So if they're coming in from out of state, or if they're coming in from a local region such as 12 to 15 or even 30 miles away, you can isolate and filter those out and then track just pure tourism to the city. And again, that's what they're down. They're down about half in terms of the people that are coming outside of a 50-mile ring. And again, you can also filter workers as well. So if they're coming in every day, that's something else that we did. You can filter those out and say, well, I don't want to capture workers because they're not tourists. And again, that reinforces this number, the 45.2%, excuse me. Didn't mean to go back there. Okay, so this is downtown foot traffic in Kansas City. As you can see, the orange is 2019 compared to blue, which is, I'm sorry, blue is 2019, orange is 2020. You can see that the differences in terms of downtown foot traffic, how much larger frequency of foot traffic was generated in downtown Kansas City in 2019 versus 2020 when the pandemic hit. If anybody wants to guess what happened here with the orange, this was actually the Super Bowl parade for the Kansas City Chiefs. So they attracted nearly 500,000 people to their downtown area around Liberty Plaza, around the Liberty Memorial, which was included in that downtown geofenced area, which is, I mean, it's such a spike. It's actually pretty incredible to see. So it's pretty nice, or pretty cool. So you can actually see the peaks and valleys. Again, weekend traffic is going to be a peak, and you can see that we're not near where we were prior to COVID hitting. St. Louis, we're off about 14.6% across all traffic, or in terms of foot traffic across all categories. And we are down about 50% in loss of visitors at St. Louis Lambert International Airport. Springfield, was down about 4.2 loss across all, or 4.2% across all categories, and has experienced a 14.3% loss of foot traffic at Battlefield Mall. And then we look at Columbia, which is 38% loss of foot traffic at the University of Missouri, and a 31.2% loss of foot traffic across all categories. So kind of with that overview, we're going to jump into some case studies here and show you exactly what the data will allow you to do in terms of the analysis of a certain place. So we're going to look at 5 locations. We're going to look at Bass Pro Shops headquarters in Springfield, Missouri. I want to look at one Metropolitan Square, which is in downtown St. Louis. It's a large office building. I want to look at Brentwood Square, which I'm going to compare with another shopping center, Maplewood Commons, I believe. University of Missouri Columbia campus, which is in Central Columbia. We're going to look at the Lodge of the Four Seasons, which is down at the Lake of the Ozarks, a project that we're working on. And then we're going to do a little bonus round, which is an Illinois cannabis dispensary, to kind of show you what would happen when a pandemic hits this type of industry. You know, you can kind of contemplate, do you think it was affected or do you not think it was affected? So starting with Springfield and Bass Pro Shops, you know, you can look at the home location of how travel has changed, or what type of an industry can remain relatively isolated and unaffected by COVID. These are the home locations and frequency of travel. As the maps gets hotter, that's where more and more visitation by non-employees and non-residents actually occurs. So in 2019, You can see the difference between the heat map in 2020, barely. You're still attracting a large degree of visitors, but it's just a little bit less in terms of the visitation that's occurring at that site. But again, still has a very wide footprint and a very large attraction range in terms of the number of people that they're bringing in. When we look at the location itself, year over year, you've got first week of January compared to the first week of November, and 2020 versus 2019. As COVID hit, you see the decrease in foot traffic, most likely because they closed their stores, whereas as before, heading into Memorial Day weekend and into the summer, they had a huge spike in people visiting their stores in 2019. And here you can see that they're pretty close to being back to nominal levels or normal levels. So not nearly as bad as some of the other locations that we'll show you and that we've seen. Again, relatively isolated and unaffected by COVID. So that's good news for Bass Pro Shops in terms of the visitation. Secondly, we'll look at One Metropolitan Square and their 1.7 million square feet of leasable space. You can see that in 2019, the orange lines, they were showing the amount of employees, because we've again filtered and isolated the employees that were coming into the site, not visitors. And you can see that this is the annual amount of visitation that they had by employees in 2019. And then as COVID hit, beginning of the pandemic, again, they were seeing this large influx of employees, and then boom, employees stopped coming into the office. So there are still some employees that are coming into the office every week, but nowhere near the amount that were. And so that has certain effects on the local economy. Again, when you look at downtown St. Louis, Charlie Gito's and some of these other restaurants have been negatively affected because they're also not getting that work rush. They're not getting that work crowd. They're not capturing those dollars from that foot traffic. So you can see these are actually some of the favorite restaurants of employees of One Met when we track where they go on their lunch hour. So Charlie Gito's is actually 22.4% and 18.58% was other. And then Starbucks, they visit again. So all these locations are actually fairly adjacent to One Metropolitan Square. So we're showing that these workers don't like to walk very far. If they do walk, which most of them do, to their lunch locations, or they eat on site. You can also begin to correlate where these workers live, where they travel every day, and then use census data to correlate what their household income is. So workers in 2020, which are the blue lines, and workers in 2019, you can see that there were reductions in their average household income as to where they lived. So those differences are representative between the orange and blue lines. So I would have thought that there would have been a higher income threshold for that building because it's mostly law offices and highly paid professional jobs. So you can see that these differences remained relatively unaffected. But the major swing were most likely the paralegals and other assistants that most likely fall into this pay range, first-year associates. And lastly, you can also track what their favorite brands are, where they shop the most often when they do go home. So workers at One Metropolitan Plaza go to Target an awful lot. They also visit Walgreens an awful lot. You can see that 67% of the workers within that building have visited a Target at least twice this year. Walgreens, same thing, 65% visited twice this year. Starbucks. You can again refine this data and filter it to any degree that you would like. So if you're trying to look at higher frequencies of visitation, such as 5 to 10 times per year, you can do that. The numbers get a little muddier, but you can also come up with some really strong correlated data to show, where these people will shop. And this is exactly what Google and Facebook do when they build your user profiles, and so that they can market to you appropriately and hit you with all the ads that they need to online. Next, I want to look at Brentwood Square. Brentwood Square is located just south of Clayton. For those of you that don't know it, it has a Whole Foods, an REI, not Pier 1 anymore, Container Store, Nordstrom Rack. So the old way that we used to do market analysis was we would pick a location here in this case, And then we draw a 5 mile ring around it. And we would say, okay, here's our demographic base because we expect it to pull from 5 miles away. That is not the correct way to do it anymore, as technology will show you. This is a true trade market area where we can actually look where the people that are coming to this location over a yearly basis actually come from. So they're coming from a much farther area than 5 miles. They're coming as far up as far North County, even some from annually, or I should say more often from Granite City. To coming there to shop. And so if we compare this market trade area that contains a Whole Foods to one that's like Maplewood Commons, which has a Sam's, a Lowe's, Walmart, a Menards, you can see the trade area is uniquely different. They're both unique in terms of what they capture and what they exclude and what they filter out. This location in terms of Maplewood is not attracting anything west of 270, and Maplewood Commons is most likely because of the Whole Foods. Even though visitation is down to those stores nationally, it still has quite an amount of gravity in terms of pulling west because of one reason or another. People are probably loyal to that brand. So it's a pretty cool analysis to look at that. Again, when you're doing comparative analysis, you can look at this data and say, is this brand or is this shopping center recovering at the same speed as such as Maplewood Commons? Maplewood Commons foot traffic is much higher in terms of its frequency compared to Brentwood Square, but you can see that they're both recovering very similar to one another. Again, decrease and then upswing on both, and now they're kind of averaging out as to right before where they were before COVID. Again, probably need about another 20% in terms of beef up to foot traffic in order to be considered normal, but it's nice to see that positive correlation between the two. Look at University of Missouri, which just posted that they actually have a higher enrollment this year compared to the enrollment crash that they experienced in 2015. This is frequency of visitors, not residents. And you can see the difference. It's not very telling, but you can see the difference between 2019 in terms of the amount of people and the visitor frequency that's occurring to the university campus there, and the change that has occurred between 2020 and 2019. Just slightly different and less dense, which probably means around Columbia, more of these people aren't going to the campus every day, whereas these people who are visiting more often are. And here is your comparison of 2019 versus 2020 visitation. You can see in the summer, classes were really poorly attended. They were probably virtual only. And you can see that, the peaks and the valleys are during the week, and then the valley is actually during the weekend. Again, large spikes, most likely football or some type of intramural game, and then big football games. Which are what caused these spikes in attendance on the campus there, which includes the stadium, compared to the blue line, which is 2020, and we just don't see those same types of attendance or foot traffic being driven to the college. And so you can, what type of effect does this lower visitation have again on a local business? And we can look at one of the most popular places that is right across the street called Shakespeare's Pizza. And we look at baseline change, which basically takes the average visitation over this range and then applies it to the average of the same range versus a year ago. And you can see major decreases in year-over-year traffic. They were doing fine up until all through 2019 in terms of organic growth. And then 2020 hit, which is the red dash line, decrease, increase, and then pandemic, very slow or very poor business foot traffic and year-over-year differences. And then as school came back in session and students began to come back to class, you can see that business has done very well, and foot traffic to those stores seems to be doing very well in terms of bringing people into that location. So Lodge of the Four Seasons, which is a 4-star hotel in the Lake of the Ozarks. Lake of the Ozarks has actually done very well this year due to relaxed policies in terms of a number of people that can come there and mask requirements. So this is 2020, 2018, and 2019. Excuse the mix up here. So 2018 is gray and 2019 is orange. You can see that the gray and the orange are strongly correlated in terms of the amount of visitation that's occurred over the last 3 years. And then when we add in the blue line, which is 2020, you can see slight disruption to the amount of people that are coming in due to the pandemic. And then it has risen right back up to almost darn near where 2018 and 2019 were, except with the exception of the last month or two, where you can see that it's decreased again, most likely due to either temperature variations or an increase back in the number of COVID cases. So again, a little worrying there, because again, hotels have to rely on occupancy in order to make money in most cases. And so this would probably be a stronger correlation to say that they're losing occupancy in their rooms. And so you can also, one of the cooler tools, sorry, this is jammed up a little bit. You can track to see where people come from and where they go after they visit this location. So if we take the Four Seasons or the Lodge of the Four Seasons and look at where people came from and where they went afterwards, most 14.6% of them came from home. A lot of them went to the came from the Lodge of the Four Seasons Avila Suite, which is a separate development just slightly north of this one. They went to Pruitt's Point, came from Pruitt's Point, which was a pretty popular bar. Little Rizzo's is a popular restaurant in that local area. And then the Outlet Center in the Ozarks. And then once they left this location, 12.5% of them went home. Again, they returned back to the Four Seasons Avila Suites. And again, pretty much the exact same, just the opposite. These seem to be the most popular locations to come from and to return home to. Or I'm sorry, not return home to, but actually visit once they've left this site. And so you can actually, again, this is by visitors by home location and zip code. So we can look at, and I apologize, it's a little hard to discern, but you can see the majority of people that are visiting the Lodge of the Four Seasons come from West County and St. Louis. You've got some from our southern counties just south of Jeffco. And then a lot of them are from the Ozarks area, Columbia, and then some from Kansas City, Johnson County, and Wyandotte in this area. And then also some from the Warrensburg area around Whiteman Air Force Base. So again, depending on what you're trying to analyze and show, you can really get into the data and extrapolate some meaningful information that you didn't necessarily have access to before. And again, so lastly, kind of the bonus round is Illinois Supply and Provisions. Medical and recreational marijuana dispensary in Collinsville has been extremely popular. They had lines out the door when they first opened, as you would expect. This is the heat map for when they first, from January 1st up until November of last year, where the majority of people that are originating from that visit that location. You can see the majority of them are from the St. Louis downtown area or just around St. Louis. And I kind of like this quote here that said, if you thought a little something like a global pandemic would stop the tax revenue bonanza that Illinois has been enjoying ever since the state legalized recreational marijuana, buddy, you thought wrong. And that's absolutely the case. You can see that 50% of the people are actually coming from home, and then they're returning home once they've purchased their product. This makes sense at first blush. Whenever you probably say Splash City Water Park, that doesn't make sense. This is actually where they're forced to park. And so they get pinged in the parking lot before a tram actually picks them up and sends them over to the dispensary. And you can see once they picked up their product, they return home. Some of them go shopping. Some of them go to White Castle. So that should actually be a pretty strong confirmation that that this is true and correct. And then again, we have weekly visitation in terms of how much foot traffic has actually occurred at that location. You can see it has dropped off a little as I think that maybe recreational marijuana has kind of become the new normal in Illinois, and people have gotten used to it in the St. Louis area. So plus there have been other locations that have opened up. I think one opened up in Sauget that we actually track. And that foot traffic has also remained relatively unchanged as part of the pandemic. But massive influx of people when it first opened, and then you can see the fad kind of wore off. And then as the pandemic hit, people actually wanted to use that product more. So frequency at that location increased in terms of foot traffic, and now it's decreased a little more. So that's kind of where this leaves us. That's the last slide. I'm going to let Andy kind of talk about, what we use this data for, not necessarily what we use it for, but how we use it to better forecast, where we think we're going in the future. And that's pretty much it.
Yeah. Thanks, Adam. Yeah. So we've been working with this information to try to do a few things this year. One, to understand trade areas better, and also to understand consumer behavior better. Understanding that there's some, macro level factors influencing people's decisions this year. People are doing a lot more online retail buying. They're doing more, shipped and grocery deliveries and these kinds of things. But there's also some contextual differences, like some shopping centers are behaving differently, some parts of the state are behaving differently. Not every place is responding the same to the situation. So we've been working with this data to try to understand, okay, how are certain places being affected? Maybe more than others, maybe less than others. And so I think that's what you've seen here this morning. And so, part of what next year looks like, still obviously a very fluid situation. So we're trying just to get our hands on as much data as we can so we can understand where things might be headed. I think everyone saw, or at least I hope everyone saw over the past week, the announcements about, 2 effective vaccines, which is very promising. If most people can start to get access to vaccines in next spring, then we may hopefully get back to something approaching normal by this time next year. So that's what we're thinking about as well. We had a couple questions in the chat. Maybe we can try to address real quick. First one from Michael Greathouse. Why is the employee foot traffic so dynamic week to week? And I think I saw this question come in around the time we were talking about Met Square. Adam, do you want to take a crack at answering that question?
I think it's so dynamic because it obviously is going to be dependent on whether those people absolutely have to meet within the office, as well as it's going to show you from week to week, excluding weekends. It's going to, when people don't show up to the office on the weekends, it's going to ping that and make that trough or that valley in the graph. So I think one of the most useful ways to actually show that data is a week to week basis, because if I give it to you on a daily basis, it really creates these hard jagged lines, even if you smooth them, and it would have looked even more dramatic. But I believe that's probably what you were referring to and why you thought that.
Well, you had the weeks graphed, like week numbers, and it was like every other week was a peak. So it was like looking at it, and it just seems so weird for behavior for office, for it to be like that every other week, to have so much foot traffic.
Yeah, Michael, I don't know. I'll have to dive into the data a little further, and I can get you an answer for sure. We can find out exactly why it was doing that.
I just found it fascinating.
Yeah, I don't know right offhand for certain. I'll get you an answer by the end of the day.
And then we had a question from Katie Shackelford. Does the drop in visitation have the same impact on revenue for local and small retailers? It kind of depends on what type of business the retailer. If it's clothing store, that sort of thing, certainly we've seen a drop in revenue. If it's a restaurant, obviously restaurants have seen drops in revenue. The restaurateurs I've spoken to, we're seeing some pretty significant drops in revenue. So yeah, I think that would be true. Adam, what do you think?
I think you're absolutely right. I think it depends on whether those local businesses have the ability to rely on e-commerce or not. I think there's a strong correlation to losses of revenue whenever those companies cannot collect e-commerce revenues. So if they're reliant, such as AMC Theaters or the Lodge at the Four Seasons, where they're actually relying on bodies in seats or bodies in rooms, then yeah, they're in trouble and they're losing dollars, and we're 100% sure on that. Otherwise, there's really only a couple of ways where we can verify that information. One of them is, entering through an NDA with the city and having to wait 2 months for the Department of Revenue to produce turnover revenues in terms of what those businesses actually collected during that time period, or there's other private sources that we can rely upon that will verify those claims as well. But again, this gives us a much quicker turnaround in terms of estimating whether those businesses are doing well or not based upon our own professional knowledge, because we can collect these cell phone pings within a 3-day period, and I don't have to wait 2 months, and neither does a city or another client in order to verify that revenues are being collected. We can do it for TIF areas, we can do it for CID areas, any special taxing jurisdiction, areas as wide as a state, or a city for that matter. It's very interesting and very powerful. And again, you can get lost in it pretty easily and spend days just looking at it and following the rabbit down the rabbit hole, if you will.
Let's see, and Amos Harris asked a question: how might this cell phone tracking technology be used in the context of urban planning for downtown St. Louis? That's an interesting question, and it's one we've thought about a little bit. Because I think as Adam has just mentioned, you can use this data to understand foot traffic in any geography. So you could define, downtown St. Louis, for example. And you can see on one level how people move through it, like what businesses they patronize and how they get there. And another level, you can see how people congregate, like where are the masses of visitation, where are the masses of activity, either on a given day or for a given period of time, series of days or weeks, or for a given period of time during a day. So you can understand kind of how downtown lives on a daily basis as it is now, and then you can kind of use that information to anticipate how behavior in downtown St. Louis might change if you added a certain type of development, or if you changed a certain use from one use to another, and that sort of thing. And that one thing that I think would be interesting to do, and we haven't applied this yet, would be to pair this technology with crowd modeling software. So that, for example, on big event days, like big baseball game days or big festival days, plug this in and help you see and understand how people move through the space of downtown, move through public spaces and how they use it, which I think would help you understand, if you're looking at making an investment in a public space, how to do that and whether it might make sense, or if or when you do it, how people might use it. So it'd be an interesting tool to help, I think, analyze and review those kinds of planning ideas before those investments are made. So
I would also add, Andy, that you can also monitor the way people move throughout the community and figure out hotspots in terms of attraction. As Andy was saying, when you do that analysis, we can actually look at which way or which mode of transportation a person chose, what route they chose when they traveled from their house to whatever the destination was. And that is done by speed, it's done by the route, and it's done by correlating patterns of roadway networks and whether they have a bike lane or not. So again, it's very powerful, and you can set that up from a modeling aspect. I think Katie Shackelford's on here. I don't know what type of modeling software they use at Lochner, but it looks very similar to that when you actually show the dots moving from an anonymous place within a 6-block area to a location. You see this dot travel across a roadway, and I didn't show you any. For the sake of time, I didn't show you near the amount of advanced. Actually, I didn't show you any advanced analysis that we can do with this, which is it's really cool. And I hate saying that, but the cool factor on this is really off the charts. And I've been playing with it for, I don't know how long, 8 months, Andy. We've been using it on our projects. Yeah. And, I'm still surprised by what I see every single day.
We got a couple more questions from Michael Greathouse. Have you ever measured foot traffic by development type, new versus old, strip center versus new urbanism, city versus county? Goal be to understand demand and why development style created it. I know that we have gotten into exactly that type of comparison. But it would be certainly an interesting comparison to carry out. I think you'd want to have to control for the type of tenants and stuff that are in there as well, but it'd be certainly interesting to look at. And then what's the degree of accuracy for geofencing? Could it be used to understand which type of corporate real estate solution appeals more to associates, or from a developer standpoint, which amenities worth the investment?
It's 98.5% accurate.
There you go. There you go. Thanks, Adam. And yeah, I think you can use it to understand how your decisions about investment impact your visitation. We know that property managers use this data to answer those kinds of questions. And more and more municipalities are starting to rely on this kind of data to also answer those same kind of questions. Okay, one more question. Given that retailers look at traffic volume, daily traffic volume is a key factor for looking. This tool will be used to debunk that. You need so much vehicle traffic to justify a successful new site. Well, that's a good question, because I think that you can help a retailer understand the trade area that they may be looking at, right? And understanding, where people come from and whether where their visitors come from, whether that's represented in the traffic volume or not, and then understand whether that location makes sense. So I think this information helps you get a little more granular past just relying on traffic volume to understand whether a site may make sense. Yeah. Adam, do you have anything else?
I don't. I just really appreciate the opportunity to come speak with you all today and kind of show you what we've been working on at PGAV for practically this year, and building these analyses and refining our methods to use this data. I know it's been we've utilized it a few times for some of our existing clients, and they're very excited about it. I hope you all are excited about it. So again, thank you for the opportunity.
And we're also, if anyone wants to just verbally ask the question themselves, feel free. You don't necessarily have to use the chat function. But before we wrap up, I did just want to mention that ULI St. Louis is having our annual Emerging Trends event virtually this year. And that's on December 10th at 8:30 in the morning. And it'll be a pretty similar format to previous years. We'll have a national presenter give the overview of the report, and then we will have a local panel. And the theme this year is, oh, Kelly, it just slipped me, reinvention. And our confirmed speakers so far are Maxine Clark and Kevin Bryant, and we're still working on finishing out the panel. But is there anyone who wants to just ask the question in speaking format? Okay, but we do have one more over chat. Yeah, I'll let you guys take that.
Oh, okay. It's like Kristen Harden notes a small comment on the prior post-visit slide related to the dispensary in Collinsville. Oh, and Kristen is a planner in Collinsville, so she should know this. This is good, thank you. The site doesn't have enough on-site parking to meet their needs, so they've partnered with surrounding property owners to share parking, including the adjacent suburban journalist property. The city is assisted by helping dispensaries secure a parking agreement at the vacant Gateway Fund Park, which is next door to Collinsville Aqua Park. Okay, well, it's good to know. Thank you. All right.
Oh, and Kelly just added in the chat, we also have Phil Hulse and Opal Jones are confirmed for speakers as well at Emerging Trends. And we just wanted to say thank you to Andy and Adam for providing this presentation this morning. And as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, we will continue this series into 2021.